and for the crew there were some unusual problems in covering the event.
One of the major problems we faced during the actual parade was coping with the number of people. I'm sure that we all were suffering from crowd shock because up to an estimated 2 million people lined the parade route down Colorado Avenue to watch the parade itself. And we tried to cover the progress of the marching koalas down the parade route, which meant sort of taking a number of vantage points and trying to skirt around the parade route, get the band going past and then try and do it again. And by the time we got to the end of the parade, I'm sure we were just as exhausted as the members of the band.
Tyrrells have tested the machine with 4 varieties of grapes. In each case, the juice is up to 10%. Major wine producers, that represents a lot of money. Tyrrells also found the machine produced more high-quality free-run juice than the normal crushing process, insofar acidity and flavour retention haven't been affected by the machine. The plasmolisator is used widely in the Soviet Union, not only in winemaking but also in the extraction of juice from up to 100 other fruits. And if the tests of Tyrrells are successful, the machine will no doubt become widely used in other Australian industries. Murray Tyrrell of Tyrrell's Winery explains his interest in the plasmolisator.
We were always interested as a company in research, and our elders mentioned it to us some 12 months ago that this machine was available, and if they brought it into Australia, would we like to do the research? And of course, naturally, we said yes, and so here it is.
And how have the results been so far?
Well, they've been fascinating, the results. As we said earlier this morning, we're getting an increase in yield from our grapes of somewhere between 8 and 14%. And of course, that means a lot when you're processing something like 2,000 tonnes of grapes.
And will you be following through with the machine?
Yes, we certainly will, because the initial results are very, very encouraging. We have to do further research into the quality of the wine, but to date there is no difference in the juice that we can see or that we can see by tasting, and I think we'll evaluate the whole project in May when we bring our wines out of this vintage for tasting.
With the New South Wales election now only 9 days away, an early federal election is the furthest thing from many people's minds. But Senator Mason made it quite clear today that there is much more than a slight chance that Mr Hawke will call an early poll in November. He even went so far as to point to a date.
I think that the Prime Minister will do much the same as Neville Wran has done, that he'll have a budget with tax cuts and things of that kind in August, have a short budget session, and then the House of Parliament will rise and there'll be a very short 2 or 3 week election campaign, and I've heard the date freely mentioned in Canberra that we can expect it on the 7th of November, so it'll be all over by the end of the year.
Senator Mason was in Newcastle today to address a meeting of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry at the City Hall. His speech was titled Patterns for Prosperity, and apart from a brief reference to the possibility of an early election, dealt with his recipe for continued economic development in Australia. Senator Mason says Australians cannot afford to relax just because we are starting to pull out of the recession. He believes there are 3 things the government should be doing to ensure a prosperous future.
I think first of all we have to recognise the fact that as far as education is concerned, we are now right at the bottom of the barrel of the OECD countries. We've only got half as many people completing secondary school as the OECD average, and very much fewer than Japan. And in tertiary education, it's even worse. The second major point was liquid fuel. We have to begin, as other countries are doing, installing special new technology which does exist, which can turn natural gas into fuel for motor cars. The third major thing is to get new technology into the society, new sunrise industries, especially in the energy field, and to persuade our people to accept those ideas.
schools and in homes, microcomputers are going from strength to strength, and the public is thirsty for information. A major exhibition in Sydney this week is attracting big crowds. The Newcastle CAE's microcomputer exhibition is today on the 7th of April, and major manufacturers have indicated they will be showing their latest weapons in what's become the most competitive market. The CAE's reason for getting into the exhibition game is simply to provide answers to questions.
There's an incredible amount of interest of the people of Newcastle for computers. It seems that people are thirsting for knowledge. Everybody wants to know about computers. I'm going in the staff room here, I get interrogated every day about the latest model computers and what can I have in my office, and I want to get a computer for my kid, and what do I do? There's an enormous amount of knowledge needed. People want to know these things.
Can you see the exhibition answering some of those questions?
I hope so. I hope that we're going to get thousands of people here to find out about computers, see them for themselves, and check out whether they're going to be of any use to them. Yes.
Sitting just off the New England Highway, Bridge House is classified by the National Trust. It was built in 1829 by Samuel Clift, a former convict. Clift had been transported for 14 years for his involvement in a counterfeiting racket, and on his release had been given this acre of land. The original house he built there is a ruin within the gardens of Bridge House. Clift began to farm and slowly built a secure position within Maitland society. He later moved northwest, buying Breezer Station, a 10,500-acre property between Corindi and Gunnedah, which is still owned by his descendants. It was one of his descendants, Mrs. Elaine Carty Salmon of Wahroonga, who won the bidding for Bridge House at Australia Square in Sydney yesterday. In recent years, the house has been owned and extensively restored by Mr. Stephen Roberts, a veterinarian, and his wife Judith. Their decision to auction the house attracted spirited bidding. The reserve price of $110,000 was passed easily. Mrs. Carty Salmon will pay $119,000. From their opening notes at Newcastle Workers' Club, it was obvious that the regimental band of the Coldstream Guards were to have a fine send-off from Australia. There were many musicians and audience there to appreciate the smooth precision for which the Guards have become famous. Originally invited to this country to perform at the Adelaide Festival, the band also gave performances at the Perth Festival, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Wollongong and New Zealand. The conductor and senior director of music, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Ridings, said last night they had been given a wonderful reception everywhere they went. The uniforms the 43 band members wore on stage have been much the same for 250 years. Lieutenant Colonel Ridings wore an outfit descended from the frock coat of Victorian England. The traditional bearskin hats seen outside Buckingham Palace were absent because they are only worn on ceremonial occasions. The Coldstream Guards leave Newcastle and Australia today. Present at Dudley Primary School for the meeting last night were representatives of the National Parks and Wildlife Service and the Department of Planning and Environment. They were there to answer the questions of local residents who since 1975 have made slow progress in their efforts to save the 500 hectares of land surrounding Glenrock Lagoon. It was about that time that some locals became concerned about the damage the area was suffering at the hands of trail bike riders and beach users. A number of parties own or administer sections of the land, complicating efforts to protect it. According to spokesman Mr. Don Owers, time is running out.
There's been a lot of damage to the area caused by indiscriminate usage and land acquisition, and I think we're seeing the whole area degrade.
The meeting therefore resolved that a letter of protest will be sent to the state government requesting that it support the proposed Glenrock State Recreation Area by taking immediate action to prevent its further degradation. Those at the meeting also formed themselves into the Save Glenrock Committee. Ironically, a controversial piece of the proposed SRA off Bombala Street, Dudley, will have a change of zoning tomorrow. The Department of Planning and Environment will no longer regard the land as being for proposed open space purposes, such as a state recreation area, but only require that the land be environmentally protected. Owner Mr. Jack Gardner, who has been clearing the land, quoted at the meeting last night a letter he had received from the state government. It apparently said the state government no longer thought the land was worthy of preservation because of the scrub and tree clearing.
Hustled along from location to location by worrying press secretary, Mr. Brereton didn't pretend that today's visit was anything more than a chance to be seen with his local ALP colleagues. At Kooragang Island, he pointed out that 300 hectares of prime industrial land is still available for industrial development and described the area as an industrial asset for the region. Then it was on to the State Dockyard, which in the past has not been one of the...
Another 3 years ago,
He describes supervision of the Dockyard as a challenge, and in fact has already faced with resolving a work ban imposed on the yard by the Plumbers and Gas Fitters Union.
I'm in the course of having some discussions today with management and with the men on the job. I've been reassured by their advice that there's been no interference with work as a result of these black bans that were spoken about earlier on today. These sorts of disputes should be and indeed must be resolved, and I believe there'll be some negotiations during the course of this week. I'm very confident that any potential difficulties can be overcome.
In spite of such problems, Mr. Brereton describes public works as a good news portfolio compared to health, which he held previously. But there was a little confusion when he released some hastily prepared good news on the former Wood Street Tech. The building was described as a brewery in Parry Street. However, he did detail refurbishing of the historic building, which will become part of the adjacent $10 million food technology school that's nearing completion. Work on the old Wood Street Tech will cost about $600,000, and the tender is expected to be awarded next week. In 1884, when Newcastle's first infantry unit was raised, a modern-day sniper would probably have frightened the enemy to death. The Yowie-style camouflage suit was part of a parade of uniforms, illustrating how the appearance of the infantryman has changed even since World War I. The centenary celebrations are being staged by Newcastle's Reserve Infantry Unit, the 2nd Battalion Royal New South Wales Regiment. But regular soldiers from the Infantry Centre at Singleton today helped stage a weapon display. This was used to explain the intricacies of the M16 or demonstrating that today's soldiers still have to carry some heavy loads.
As you can see, it's pretty heavy. You want to go?
He can also pack a punch that can KO a tank.
This is an 84mm Carl Gustav, an anti-armour weapon. They can fire different types of rounds, high explosive anti-tank, illuminating rounds, smoke rounds, and is used against tanks and APCs. Okay, goes into the shoulder.
Former members of the 2nd Battalion is being held at the Hamilton Training Depot.
You have another bloke at the back of you. We'll open it up. He places a round in for you. Then he'll tap you on the...
The accident happened at 7:30 this morning. This blue car came out of a lane onto the highway and hit the semi side on. The truck driver, Mick Hicks from Newcastle, says he just lost control.
I could feel it weaving, you know, and I tried to hold it as straight as I could, and then I looked in the mirror and the trailer's on the side, dragging behind me.
The 24-ton load of ammonium nitrate was bound for Liddell. At Liddell, it's used as an explosive, and Mick makes the trip nearly every day. When mixed with diesel, it becomes extremely volatile. As the fuel tank was ruptured and diesel had spilled onto the road, the highway was blocked to all traffic. Army personnel from the nearby Singleton Army base joined local rescue services in clearing up the spill. The driver of the car received treatment at Singleton Hospital.
Soon, some 10,000 phone calls seeking donations to the Lions Healthcare Foundation will be made throughout the Hunter.
Oh, hello. We're ringing in aid of our healthcare. We're ringing in aid of our Healthcare Foundation and the Australian Kidney Foundation.
Collectors will then be dispatched to pick up any money promised. The Newcastle Lions Club alone plans 3,000 calls, but it remains to be seen if the scheme will be better than the old-fashioned door knock.
By Sunday night, we'll have a firm answer to that. The door-to-door does have the benefit of face-to-face contact, but using the telephone, we can contact far more people in a given period.
Are you at all worried about running into some hostility from people that don't like being phoned by perhaps strangers?
Well, I am a little bit worried, especially because a lot of the people that are doing this and, for example, giving up their weekends are inexperienced. They're not professional phone canvassers, so if they get a bit of hostility, I could lose a lot of phone callers very, very quickly. So hopefully the public will be very kind to them and very generous.
Playing against the new team in the National Basketball League, the Melbourne Tigers, the Kern Falcons stretched their winning tally to 10 with just 2 losses. It was a typical game for the Newcastle Falcons. They started comfortably enough, but found themselves behind at both quarter time 24-19 and at half time 54-46, and they looked to be in some sort of trouble. But they started the third quarter in a totally different frame of mind and hit the Tigers like a lightning bolt with form like this. The session completely flattened the visitors, and it was really over at three-quarter time after the Falcons had rattled up 40 points in the quarter. Mike Johnson was in superb shooting form and took the Man of the Match award. The 2 Australian imports, Jeff Patterson and Frank Goldfinch, have proved to be ideal additions, and the Falcons are starting to look like a championship prospect.
Met local dignitaries this afternoon at the Smith family's Lambton depot. Chairman of the board, Mr Garth Barraclough, says that the Smith family doubled the amount of aid it has given in the past 3 years. He says the demand for food, clothing and furniture the Smith family provides far outweighs the supply. How does the Smith family cope with this kind of demand?
Well, we ask for more help, and it's extraordinary how generous people are. They give it to us, and we do our level best to spread it as evenly as we can. We've had grants of both money and lots of donations of clothing, furniture and goods. And we spread it, as I say, as evenly as we can, but we don't meet the demand.
Not actually. We have a lot of young members and older members coming back into the sport. They find training's a little bit easier, and there's not so much involvement in the actual sport.
I was going to say, judo's not quite as rough, is it? Maybe it's more for the family syndrome?
That's true, yes. Not quite as much kicking or carrying on in that type of offence, you know. So.
But of course, once they make a representative team, I guess the competition then firms up and it's as tough as anything.
It's big business then, where you have very hard training and gain selection. You may gain selection in the New South Wales squad to represent the area for the Australian titles.